Hey, welcome to a book wrap up for December. I've read a few books and maybe I'm just a bit of a negative Nancy, but I have some strong opinions on all of them. So come along with me and tell me what you've thought of these books if you've read them, and we'll just jump into it. I got around to reading The Devil in the White City, Murder, Magic, and Madness at the Fair That Changed America by Eric Larson. And this is kind of one of those books that you get two for the price of one. We have, on one hand, it's following the storyline of the Chicago World Fair in 1893, and that is super interesting. I mean, I didn't know very much about it at all, and it was super worth it to learn about that and how it came to be and how the World Fair ended up in Chicago in response to the fair that had been in Paris. And it was super interesting, like Ferris wheels came from this, and the Pledge of Allegiance. Like, there were so many things that were developed for this fair specifically, and just looking at its development and the problems that it faced and the construction, super interesting. On the other hand, there also, at the same time in that city, was a very prolific serial killer, H.H. Holmes, and he had a house near the fair and used it to murder many people. And so this follows kind of his life and what happened with him and how he was caught and all those types of things. So two stories in one. I completely agree with the criticism that this makes no sense why they're together. Just because they happen to be taking place at the same time and the same place doesn't mean they have anything to do with each other. And the author keeps trying to squish the stories together, but they don't really intersect very well. So I would just be kind of getting into the, oh yeah, the fair developed, oh, the size of the gravel was necessary to take into account for like the pathways for women's heels, and then it flip over to the serial killer and he was dissolving body parts in acid. It was a little like, it just didn't fit together very well for me. But I mean, both stories were very interesting. I was very interested in both of them. So, I mean, it's very readable and I do recommend it. It did give me a lot of thoughts on I'm not really a true crime reader. I don't listen to true crime podcasts. That's not really my vibe. And for those of you who do, or those of you who don't, I would like to actually know your thoughts on true crime and like, when is it respectful and okay in books? And I'm of the opinion that if there is a horrible event, we shouldn't be publicizing the perpetrator. You know, I think that's a lot of times what they're after, is that fame and recognition. And I think we should focus in on the victims and the heroes that were in horrible situations, and not people who perpetrate horrible crimes. And so focusing so much on H.H. Holmes in the book left me feeling a little bit icky. And I don't know if this is, I don't know. For those of you who have read a lot of true crime, do you feel like there are more successful ways to do that, where you feel like it was treated well? Or do you think that in general true crime books are okay when they focus in on this? I just don't know. It left me feeling just a little bit weird, and it's nothing to say negative about the book necessarily, but just more of the morality of focusing on H.H. Holmes and not on the people who caught him or his victims quite as much. And so it left me thinking, which is always a good sign, but kind of a weird book in that it didn't mesh together very well for me. But super interesting. I do recommend it. It's interesting. I read The Hawthorne Legacy by Jennifer Lynn Barnes, and it's the second book in the Inheritance Games books. I remember I really liked the first one. It was a little teeny bopper with a love triangle kind of thing, but it was clever. It had a lot of cute, clever puzzles that they were discovering and figuring out. This one, I read it pretty quickly. It was engaging and a lot happened. And if you had a lot of lingering questions from the first one, I feel like this will really kind of settle things. I didn't feel like it was quite as clever as the first one, which made me kind of sad because I liked just those clever little puzzles and figuring it out. And this one was more just, you know, plot moving through, but not as much of the cleverness that I remember from the first book. I'm not sure if I'm going to proceed on to the third book. If anyone's read the third book and loved it, let me know, because I mean, I'm open to it. I was on board, I know what's happening, but I feel like the second book kind of wrapped up most of my questions. I don't have any burning questions that I need to have answered by reading the third one, so I think I might just stop it there, but let me know if you've read the last one in this series. I have tried to film this clip about this book like 10 times now, and I just don't think my thoughts are well put together, and I hate to write out a whole script or anything, so bear with me. I have some thoughts, but I don't think they're really well put together, and maybe I should go back and read it more closely, but I don't really want to. So the book was Matrix by Lauren Groff, and this takes place in like the 1200s. We have this girl Marie who is an illegitimate daughter of a noble person in France, and she is sent by the queen out to an abbey in England, and the abbey is just destitute. They're all, you know, dying of starvation basically, and Marie, the book takes place over her lifespan, and she turns the whole abbey around and really takes charge, and it's very interesting. Like, I think it's kind of an interesting take on that time period, and I did enjoy a lot of how that came together. Some things that I wasn't quite sure on is just maybe, I feel like Marie as a character was a little weird for me. She had a lot of she had a lot of confidence in her decisions and what she felt was right. And she had a lot of like visions that told her what needed to happen for the abbey. And that makes sense to me, but I feel like we never got any sort of like internal feelings about maybe any sort of self-doubt from Marie. And I feel like, especially in that time period when the role of women was a lot of times limited, maybe she might have had more like self-doubt or some hubris or some sort of something. Like, I felt like she was almost too perfect, which made her a little inaccessible. But I did like kind of just the tellings of the abbey and stuff. I don't know if the setting was my favorite because it kept giving me flashbacks to the book Pope Joan, which I read like 10 years ago, and I don't think I liked that at the time. And so all that, like, for some reason this book just kept throwing me back into that, and I was kind of like, meh. This was interesting, talking about like women who love women in the church, and I thought that was an interesting aspect of this story, that kind of representation. So all in all, like, it was an interesting read, and I would really be interested to hear more thoughts on it. I just don't know if my thoughts have really come together in a very concise sort of way on this book. I'm just not quite sure about it. Like, did I like it? Well, I got through it really fast. Did I like the setting? No, but that's more just my preference, I guess, right now. Did I connect with the character? Not super well, but like plot-wise, yeah, like I was on board. So I don't know. It was fine. So I read Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind by Yuval Noah Harari, and I feel like the title is misleading. I was expecting more of a history book, and instead I feel like you could have probably called it more of a biography of humanity. It more focuses in on evolution, where Homo sapiens started out, where we started out, and where we are going, and what the future holds for us as a species. And all in all, like, I think that's interesting. I think that's a really interesting concept. There were some really interesting things, especially toward the beginning, just how we have evolved looking back. About halfway through the book, I feel like it lost a lot of its interest and a lot of its fact-based things, and instead kind of turned into more of a philosophy book for me. Like, I feel like it was just more what the author thought about certain things, and I feel like some of his opinions were very black and white and didn't have a lot of nuance. His whole thing about intelligent design, that in the future we'll be able to, like, change genetic code and design people, and but that's the only true intelligent design because of the impossibility of God. And I feel like there's a little more nuance in that. I mean, you can't prove there's no God, just the way like you can't prove that there is. And I think that he was very black and white in that, and I don't think that science and religion are that diametrically opposed as you've all seemed to think, or at least explain in this book. I do feel like there were some very interesting things, but my problem with it is I've just left the book not feeling like I really gained a lot of information or thoughts that were new, and or at least ones that will stick with me. And that probably is my fault in reading it quickly, but usually when I come away from a book, I'm like, oh yeah, and I really learned this, and I can throw out some tidbits that I learned that were interesting. And I feel like I didn't get a ton with that. So if you've read this book, especially if you've liked it, could you let me know what stuck with you from this book? Because it was a lot of information and a very ambitious and broad undertaking, but I didn't ever feel like anything stuck with me that I'm like, yes, I learned this, and now it has changed my worldview. So I'm not sure on this one. Really, all my books the past week or so, I'm just not 100% sure on, but I would love to hear any thoughts that you have about it. And that is the rest of the books that I have read this far in December. So thank you for coming along with me. If you have thoughts on these books, please leave a comment below. I would love to hear any thoughts and opinions on these books, because if you noticed in this video, I don't have a lot of super concrete ideas on these books. I would really like to know what anyone else thinks about them. And I will see you all on the next one.